Our guest today is an executive professor in the finance department at Texas A&M, among many other things which we'll get into. But Cydney Donnell, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Glad to have you. So tell us a little bit about you. Give us the quick version of how we got here.
Country girl goes to big city.
Yes.
I grew up on a ranch in South Texas, and I was wooed by all kinds of colleges, but one of those was Texas A&M. They were doing a big program and still do a big program trying to recruit women in engineering. And although I looked at some Ivy and second-tier Ivy schools, I ultimately wanted a big state schools experience, having grown up in the country. And being in a little school, we didn't have a football team. We had an ag extension agent. But I just wanted that kind of experience. My college counselor was horrified, but it was the best decision I ever made. From here, I went into banking for a little while. I didn't decide that I wanted to go to New York until I'd done that for about 4 years. I had always been in love with New York, but I wasn't quite ready to tackle the Big Apple. So I moved up there right before the huge crash here in Texas, managed to get a job, and long story short, built an asset management company with some great partners, retired at about 45, didn't know what I wanted to do. And again, to condense the story, the dean at the time, Dean Strauser, agreed to let me come and try my hand at teaching just because I was sort of at loose ends about what the next phase was going to be. And gradually I started doing some corporate board work. And the next thing I know, I'm getting sucked in more and more into teaching at A&M. So that's what I do now is I spend half to 3/4 of my time here with Mays. And then the other bit of my time is running family businesses and doing board work. So I'm very busy.
I'm sure. So when people retire at 45, normally the reason is because they've made enough money to be set for the rest of their lives and they don't want to do the job that they're doing anymore, often because it's stressful or for any number of other reasons, but I don't want to assume anything. So why did you retire at 45?
I had a lot of reasons. I was not happy anymore. I didn't figure out why I wasn't happy for a couple of years. And my father had been diagnosed with Parkinson's, and I thought, I just need to kind of come home. I need to regroup and rethink this whole life thing. I was single at the time, and I just met my husband, and I kept saying, you don't want to date me. And so all of a sudden, my life just went 180 degrees. I moved to Fredericksburg. I got married. I had no job. I didn't know what I was going to do. But sometimes you know that something's not right, but somehow you just can't see the forest for the trees. And so the break kind of allowed me to step back and sort of get in touch with what I wanted to do. And I had a really good friend who had retired about at the same age, and he called me and he said, my advice is don't do anything for 6 months. Nothing. Just be. And that was good because I've just watched another friend of mine retire, and she's jumped on and doing all kinds of things. And my first thought is, you're doing too much at once, and you make these commitments, and then you can't back out of them very easily.
So let's talk about the 2 REITs that you served on the board of directors for, the American Campus Communities and Pebblebrook Hotel Trust. So first, let's give our listeners the 1-minute version of what an REIT is.
So a real estate investment trust is just a company that owns and operates, develops, manages real estate, commercial real estate usually, but sometimes loans, sometimes houses. And there's just an agreement with the Department of Treasury that if they pay out essentially most of their cash flow in the form of dividends, then they'll not be taxed at the corporate level.
Oh, I see.
So it's a little bit of a model like a mutual fund, but it's morphed into being a real company. So, but there's nothing mysterious. They're companies that invest in real estate.
Makes sense. And now let's talk about the board side of it. So first, let's start with motivation. Many aspiring executives want to serve on boards. what's the biggest thing to gain from doing that?
Well, there's always the monetary aspect. If you look at the average pay for board work, I don't know what the average is, but it can range anywhere from $80,000 to $300,000 a year. So it pays extremely well, and it's part-time work. It's not flat out full, but it's also a lot of work. Mm-hmm. Don't get me wrong. I think though the motivation, other than that, is just the being a part of building a business, mm-hmm. helping a management team determine their strategic direction. When they're facing challenges, hopefully the board can bring some good advice and guidelines. Mm-hmm. Making sure that the company's doing the right thing. It's maybe a shock to some of our Aggies out there who value the code of conduct, but not every executive is out there to think about doing the best for their shareholders. No. A lot of times they're out there trying to do the best for themselves alone. So, you're responsible to those thousands and thousands and thousands of beneficiaries. And I think when you put that hat on, you become very serious about your board work. And the minute that I'm not engaged is the minute that I don't want to be on that board anymore, because either I'm not getting some kind of fulfillment from the job, or I don't think I can add value. I think there are a lot of people who sit on boards that aren't really adding value and don't realize that they're not.
So oftentimes those people are really talented people. Why do you think, let's assume that this is a smart person that we're talking about, and this person is maybe serving on other boards, maybe has a full-time executive position of their own. Why is that a problem that's endemic to boards in particular? Is it just the wrong fit, or
why is the wrong person on a board?
Well, why is a person sitting on a board thinking they're adding value and really not?
Well, I think the biggest mistake you can see with especially new board members is there's a big difference between running the company and guiding the company.
Okay.
They get into the minutia.
Oh.
Like they may sit there and the management's presenting their newest investment opportunity, and the board member starts to try to negotiate the deal points or create the direct, just question in too much detail the decision making.
Right.
Well, that's what we have management teams for.
Right.
Is to do all that hard work and vet and then feel good about what they're recommending to the board. Mm-hmm. And we're supposed to challenge and question, but there's just a fine line. You're not there to manage the company.
Right. So what then, forgive my ignorance, what then is the difference between your board of directors, which most big company, maybe all big companies have a board of directors, and then a board of advisors, which is definitely something I've heard of.
Yeah.
But seems to be less.
So an advisory board is just what it sounds like. They can give advice, but they'd have no power.
Oh, I see.
They can't vote. We could, as a board, fire the CEO.
Right.
We do, as a board, hire the auditors. Mm-hmm. Or actually, technically the audit committee hires the auditors. We hire compensation consultants. We have internal audit report directly to us. So there are powers that we have. We can vote and say no. Mm-hmm. An advisory vote, if they vote no, that they can say, well, thank you very much for the advice, but we're going to do it anyway.
Right. What's the most counterintuitive thing you've learned from sitting on a board? What's surprised you the most?
Well, gosh, that's a hard question to answer, because every meeting I always learn something. And what surprised me the most, I guess the ways in which I was going to add value.
Oh.
That would be one. And the other is that every board culture is different. Mm-hmm. Just like I've learned that every class is the culture, the personality of the class is different.
Right.
Not every board is exactly alike in the way they function, in the way they socialize, in the way that they communicate, in the sort of the social norms that they establish. So That's the other thing that was surprising. I thought it'd all be kind of the same, routine matters. It's just different.
Let's go back to that first one. You said the ways that you added value surprised you. What? Tell us more about that.
I sat on the other side for so long as an analyst, as someone who was questioning management's, how are you going to drive earnings? Why are you making these investments? That it never occurred to me that perspective the board still needed, because you would think that they've sat and heard that from so many people. And for me to be able to tell the boards, well, here's how the analysts think about this issue.
Right.
Here's how the street's going to jump all over this, especially with some of the companies where they're newly minted public companies and don't have as much experience. That really added a lot more value. Also, I'm a strategic thinker. I think one of the things that I know you sometimes ask is, what is your secret power? Well, mine is building the spider web.
Right.
So I guess I'm a spider woman. And when a problem presents to me, I start to create this scenario of what are the different ways in which things we need to pull together to solve the problem? Who do we need to get? It happens weekly where I do this. And it's so much fun because it's how I network people together, how I network resources together. And I love being able to say, okay, do this, and do this, and then let them go do it. And I just kind of watch and see what happens.
Right.
And so I do a lot of that. Here's the issue. Here's how you solve it. One of the boards, they don't need me to do that so much. They're really talented in terms of how they think strategically about an asset. But it's been interesting to watch it evolve into thinking about their company as being a collection of assets and to becoming a company with a strategy. I don't know that I would enjoy being on a corporate board where the team was a challenge, where they were struggling to build a business.
Right.
That would not excite me too much.
Thanks for bailing me out. I forgot to ask the superpower question earlier, but you looped it in very nicely. Something we talked about before we got on the air was that corporate boards have struggled to achieve diverse representation. Let's talk a little bit more about that. Where do you think the problem comes from? Why has the corporate world had so much trouble addressing it? What do you think about all that?
Well, I think there are multiple reasons, but I think the main reason is that boards tended to, instead of following a focused approach by hiring professional headhunters with a specific mandate, they went through the who do you know routine. We have a board spot. Who would you recommend? Who do you know in your circle of friends that would be good board members? And even they would look to me and say, well, you've got to know a lot of women. Well, when I really looked at it, I did not know that many women. I mean, I'm a woman in a man's field. And the women that I do know that are on boards tend to be what we call overboarded. They're doing so many, they don't have any capacity to do anymore. I also think that the mindset of a lot of boards was too narrow. I just recently was talking to a headhunter friend who's fabulous, and I had told her, I said, I keep getting calls to do another REIT board, and that's not really what I'm interested in. I kind of would like to do an energy board. And she said, well, you have no energy on your resume. And I was sort of astounded that she would say that. And I said, what on earth are you talking about? I don't need to know how to drill the hole. I said, I've actually been on a lot of rigs, and I've actually been out in the field a lot, but what do I need to know that for to do a good job governing? And she says, well, that's the way a lot of these boards think. And I said, well, then they're thinking wrong. They're not thinking about what diversity really is. And diversity is not the categorization of male, female, white, Hispanic, African American, Asian. It's your different perspectives that you bring. Sometimes those perspectives are shaped by the culture that you've been in. They're shaped by the life you've spent. They're shaped by the experiences how people have acted towards you. They're shaped by your values. And that's really about the diversity of thought. Adding a woman or adding an African American to a board brings in a new perspective. And I think that these boards have such a narrow perspective. They think, oh, we need somebody that's run a company and that really knows, everything about Wall Street. No. Retailing got this a long time ago. They realized that women control most of the spending power. They need to have women executives. They need to have women in the boardroom because that's who they're catering to. Mm-hmm. So that's really one thing, is just sort of the narrow focus and the narrow mentality of the boards and their unwillingness to go out and seek the capabilities. The other thing is that people don't always get trained properly to be on a board. Mm-hmm. I was telling you earlier about a woman I know who's on a board in California, and she has to have a Hispanic female from California on one of the boards she serves, mm-hmm. based on the bylaws. Mm-hmm. And she's on her third candidate. And these women that came on were great, but they had no idea how to conduct themselves on a board. They had no understanding of what the board's role was. They had no sympathy for the culture. They were disruptive instead of being a disruptor, which is they impeded the flow of decision making and rather than challenging.
Created affective challenges rather than substantive challenges.
Right. And so part of that is, my response is, well, why doesn't the board set up a proper board training? Or, you don't have to send them to these expensive university trainings. There's plenty of good services out there where you explain to somebody, how do you get on a board? Mm-hmm. And then once you're on that board, what is the real role? So I think it's been a twofold problem. One is the narrow mindset of existing board members, and then the lack of understanding of people who could be very competent. But we're managing to do extremely well with our boards. We're getting ready we've just added one really powerhouse lady, from a consulting background, great strategic thinker on one of the boards. We're getting ready to add someone else at another board that has a visionary mindset as well. And I think we may have a third candidate for one of the boards that's going to bring a different diversity and talent perspective that I'm very excited about. We never start with the premise that we have to have a person of this kind of ethnic background or this kind of gender or this kind of socioeconomic background. We start from the perspective of what talents do we need on the board, and then can we fill it in with that other. Mm-hmm. What's happening right now, though, has been interesting. There's pretty much, California passed a law that you have to have at least 2 women on a board. Mm-hmm. And then there's a lot of governance. There's a company called ISS, and they've basically come down and said, we're going to recommend against the board if you don't have 2 women. And then finally, Larry Fink at BlackRock, who's the biggest shareholder of everybody, has pretty much said the same thing. So the pressure is huge mm-hmm. to find women on boards. And I get calls all the time, and I get requests for referrals. And I have women now coming in and saying, what do I need to do? And I said, well, there's a lot of things you can do. First is put up your hand and say you're interested. Let people know you want to be on a board. If you're younger and you're not sure you can get the talent, do some nonprofit board work. I was very lucky. I was at the Junior League of the City of New York, which is a hybrid board management structure at the time. Mm-hmm. And they had a great program, not-for-profit board training. And I learned all this stuff about what is governance, what's the duty of care, what's fiduciary duty. And I learned about the culture and the navigating of a board through my volunteer work. And I've done a lot of volunteer boards since then. And that's just good training for the corporate board world. Mm-hmm. The principles are the same. The missions may be slightly different. One is to break even and the other is to make as much money as possible. Mm-hmm. But functionally, it's the same thing.
Then it seems that part of the issue for diversity is that executives or companies in general, or the people who are responsible for putting the board together, there's an issue of time that they don't want to devote to it. There's an issue of money that they don't want to devote to a more concerted search. And then there's a third issue, which is just brain space, which is sort of, it's related to the other two, but it's not the same, because so much of what gets done in the business world or in our professional lives is what we think about when we're going to bed, what we dream about, what we think about when we're waking up. And the idea that people don't want to give that precious brain space to something like a search for a board member is a problem. And so then would just acknowledging this is one of the most important things our company is going to do, and we have to have to use your word from earlier, a very formalized approach to it. Is there an industry here? Like a
Well, I think it's being developed around it.
Okay.
The pressures coming, at least on the gender piece of it, are so great right now that boards are having to either compromise and take somebody on the board that they shouldn't just so they can check a box, which is the wrong thing to do.
Right.
Or they're having to really make this a priority and figure out the best way to approach it. I think we did the right thing, which is we created a skills matrix of what is the ideal candidate. We essentially wrote a job description.
I like this. Go on.
You know, people call me all the time, I want your best student. I'm like, I don't have a best student. I need your job description. I don't know anything about the culture of your company. So start with the job description. And that's what we did. We wrote a job description, and we sat down with the headhunter and we said, here's what we want. We want the following skills. And oh, by the way, and this is where Mary Bass is so great, our consultant. She sat time. She understood the culture of our board. I can't emphasize how important culture is.
Right.
And she really understood our culture. And then her job was to go out and interview potential female board candidates and make sure that she only presented those people that had the skill sets we described and that were a good cultural fit.
What is the culture of your board?
Very collaborative.
Okay.
Very family oriented.
Oh.
In one board.
Okay.
I mean, just we know we've been together quite a while. We know the children, the grandchildren. You know, it's the way that's the culture of the company, which permeates up to the board.
Okay. Good.
Okay. Very high. If you don't understand that, you know, this is a board that values teamwork, that values challenging management, but at the same time respects how we communicate with each other in a professional manner, in a respectful manner, and challenge in a way that is not demeaning. Because you will see sometimes, you'll see executives who just come in and say, well, of course, that's just the dumbest decision you've ever made. Well, that's not real helpful.
No.
So Mary spent the time really understanding how this person was going to fit in addition to what skills we needed. And then the candidates that were brought were wonderful. We had two strong candidates, and it came down to one had a slightly different skill set that we needed at the time. The other candidate's sort of in our, is out there. What do you call the relief pitcher?
Right, the bullpen.
In the bullpen, and if we decide we need another board, we certainly will go to our group of pitchers out there and say, "Are you still interested?" Because she did a great job, and I think that it sort of opened the eyes of all of us in the board to saying, "Hey, they're out there. We just weren't being effective at finding them." Now, my other board, for whatever reason, the who do you know thing has worked extremely well.
Oh.
Yeah. It's just one of those situations where, again, I think we're very purposeful in knowing what kind of skill sets are needed. The CEO is very forceful in saying, this is what I need to help me think strategically about the company. And so, again, it's all based on the skill sets first. Mm-hmm. And I wish I could tell you about the lady that's coming on our that I think is going to come on our board, because it's like, these people exist. They're amazing. So it's a long way of saying, just follow a logical recruitment process and you can find the candidates you want.
Right. And the echo of that being, take the time and spend the money and devote the brain space to following a logical recruitment process.
Right.
You spent a lot of your early career saying yes to a variety of things. And then as you reached your 40s, you decided to start saying no to some things. And you said no in a big way as you retired. You talked about how your happiness played a role in that decision. But now, do you feel you say yes and no to things in different ways than you used to? How has that process evolved?
I think I'm better at saying no.
Mm-hmm. How have you built that muscle? Just practice?
Yeah, I think you, in your life, you want to, especially, I noticed that I'm surrounded by people who like to please. I think that's consistent with wanting to be at a university. You got students, and I've got advisors around me, and they want to build up students and send them on their next journey. And so they're used to trying to be very helpful. And I think it's a hard lesson to learn that sometimes there's just a limit as to how far you can go, and it's okay to be a little bit selfish. Mm-hmm. For example, I don't have any interest in the bake sale as a way of helping raise money. Uh-huh. I don't get fulfillment. So therefore, I'm not going to say yes to that kind of charitable activity. If you want me to be on your board, and if I have the bandwidth, I'll think about it. If you want me to sit down and give you some advice, I'll do that. So I think knowing that, and I don't mean to sound full of myself, but knowing that my capabilities are actually, I just should say, I don't know that I'm a great baker, so why should I be doing the bake sale?
Right. No, I'm
much better at these other things.
Right.
I also am not going to do something that I don't have a passion for, because I know my effort's not going to be as great. Mm-hmm. So, and then being aware of what I can and cannot accomplish and within a time frame. I think a lot of times we don't realize when we say yes to something how much of a time it's going to ultimately take in our daily lives.
Implicitly, the things you are saying no to, that you have to say no to by it's just opportunity cost.
You're not doing anybody any favors if you're going to do a poor job at something because you don't have the time.
Right.
And sometimes it's hard to judge. Dr. Deere's over here, and I'm sure she can appreciate, we're on an assessment committee, and, at times it takes a lot of time, and you think, I'm never going to get through all this. And then other times it doesn't, it's manageable. And if you don't enjoy it, it's just going to seem like endless time to take getting it done. And I kind of, I've learned to appreciate what the purpose of it is. And so if I didn't think it had a good ultimate outcome, I wouldn't spend my time on it. It's the other thing. It needs to have meaning.
What's the 30-second version of what an assessment committee does? We may end up cutting this, Kyle.
Yeah, I would. Assessment is determining whether or not we're actually having the student learning outcomes that we want. In other words, simplistically, like if we really want you to be a better communicator, or are we doing a good job making our students are we doing that with our students? That's the short version.
I see. What's your proudest accomplishment? Your CV mentions you've been quoted in the Wall Street Journal, Barron's, Business Week, Fortune, Dallas Morning News. You've done a lot of stuff. What's your proudest accomplishment?
Well, you're supposed to say my children, right? But if you're talking about something that's more like what did I do that I felt really proud of, it's definitely giving the eulogy at my father's funeral. Wow. He was an incredible human being. Yeah. Kind, hardworking, so highly ethical. He should have been an Aggie, and he would have been an Aggie, except that he said he was tired of being in a military school and tired of being on the ranch, so he wanted a little something different. But he and my mother was so happy when I came here. Mm-hmm. And the minister was so funny. We were at a church in San Antonio, and my mom said, we think there'll be a lot of people here. No problem. We've had senators, and we have plenty of room. And as the people started coming in and there were standing room only, and he started to panic and worry about the fire code and all. Okay, it was like he was just astonished. There must have been 3,500 people at this funeral.
My goodness.
And after I gave the eulogy, which I was really proud of having written because I think it really talked about him as a man, and I told stories that really reflected his cute personality, and there was thunderous applause, which you never expect in church, right? It's just sort of it's supposed to be sort of a solemn occasion, right? A funeral,
right? Church, and especially,
but it was so uplifting,
a memorial service,
and I was really proud that I was able to make people happy. And I was so worried because my family was on the right side, and I'd already told all the grandkids, "Do not look at me in the face; I'll probably fall apart." And I was just going to look, I was just going to look at the friends over on the left side, and then right at the last minute, he made all my cowboy cousins with their their cowboy hats and their boots and blue jeans on, sit in the front row, and I caught contact with his first cousin, who's the biggest crybaby of all, and I thought, oh, I'm not going to get through this. He's going to start crying, then I'm going to start crying, but somehow I felt empowered at that moment. You could say, well, the Spirit of the Lord came in, and I was just ready to talk, and I was there to honor him, and I think I accomplished that. So that's why it's my proudest moment.
Wonderful. We talked about flexing a muscle earlier in terms of saying no to things. Chris Field, a previous guest on our show, says that generosity is a muscle. It has to be built up. You have been recognized for generous contributions to the Texas A&M Foundation to support the program's teaching, research service, professional development activities. When did philanthropy become important to you, and how do you work out your generosity muscle?
Gosh, I can't remember when it wasn't important. There's a Proust questionnaire that says, who would you want to be? Mm-hmm. And I sat and looked at it. I said, I want to be Happy Rockefeller. And I don't know if y'all know who that is, but she was married to one of the Rockefellers, and they never had any children. And she always had philanthropic causes that were near and dear to her. And when her husband died, he said, have fun with it, dear. And she took all the money and gave it away by the time she died. Mm-hmm. It gave her so much joy. And so I said, that's who I want to be, is somebody who gives it all away for causes that they believe in. It makes a difference. So I don't know when I first decided that I needed to do that. My father was always philanthropic, but I never even knew it half the time. I was home not that many years ago when they were announcing all the scholarships at the high school. And I said, all these people gave scholarships. Where's our name? We didn't give anything. He goes, who in the heck do you think all those anonymous scholarships were? I was like, oh, duh. Mm-hmm. So, he never wanted to take credit. He never wanted to be recognized for anything he ever did. He just always wanted to do the right thing. So somehow along the way, I must have picked that up. I probably picked it up being here at A&M. That culture of selfless service is so ingrained in all of us. So it's just part of who I am.
Tell us a little bit more about the Masters in Real Estate program, which you have directed here at Texas A&M.
So it's a pretty unique real estate program in that it's truly interdisciplinary. Many real estate programs in the country are either focused on more the architectural design side, sort of a master of real estate development, or the finance side. Mm-hmm. And we cross over both boundaries. Also, many of those programs, they may only have like 9 to 12 credit hours of real estate. It's a 36 credit hour program in real estate. And we design it to allow students to sort of find their path within an industry. It's not a discipline, because you can have great marketing skills and you can go into the brokerage profession. Mm-hmm. You can have design skills and you can go more into the development, or you can have finance skills and be a banker, or do the analysis side of the real estate. So it's truly interdisciplinary. And I got started in sort of a funny way. I was on the Association of Former Student Board, which is a great nonprofit board example. And when you do those things, Mays is always great about reaching out and getting industry executives to come and guest lecture. And so Dr. Wayne Etter, who had headed the program, and Dr. Malcolm Richards, who was the department head at the time, reached out to me and said, would you please, come speak to class? And so I met Wayne, and he said, we're so here we're loved that you're going to help support the Lear program. And I kept thinking, who in the heck is Mr. Lear? I knew nothing about it. And over time, I learned what he was quietly doing. If you knew Wayne, he's such a avuncular gentleman, and he just never, boasted anything about his program and the students, and they were accomplishing great things, but nobody knew about it. So when I started teaching, I was not teaching in the real estate program. I was teaching in the finance department. And Wayne walked into my office and he said, I want you to know that I've signed you up to teach our real estate investments class. Well, I was furious. Nobody had asked me, just sign me up. Mm-hmm. But if you knew Wayne, you just couldn't get mad at him. You couldn't say no. So I was like, oh, gosh, all right. Well, you asked me earlier why. There's a point to where I'm going with all of this. You asked me earlier why I had been retired. I had lost that connectedness to the part of the job that I loved, which was the analysis of the real estate, of the sense of place, of what made an investment interesting and successful. And by teaching this class is when I began to dawn on me, this is what's been missing in my career, was that analysis part of real estate, that somehow I'd always liked the land and locations and design and the numbers, all of it together. And so the real estate program is really about helping students find their place within it, which is actually, the real estate industry is the largest employer of people in the United States, which people do not understand.
It makes sense.
And helps them find their place in that field. We've had this program for almost 50 years. It's the number one ranked public program in the country. And we're really proud of that.
As you should be.
Yeah.
All right, let's move to some rapid fire. What do you consider your most valuable failure?
The first one, because I think as children we're brought up to make all A's, and failure is not an option. Mm-hmm. And the first time you fail and you realize you're going to survive it and that you're going to learn from it, I think that's pretty critical to learn.
I remember my first B. It seemed like the end of the world at the time.
Yeah, they all do. All failures do. But you learn that the best way to get over a failure is to own it, admit the mistake, and try to rectify it as best you can. Mm-hmm.
What do you think is people's biggest misconception of you?
That I'm terribly mean. Terribly, terribly mean. I don't know if can keep this, but somebody told me I had rest face, RBF. And I didn't know, I'd never heard the term, but I knew immediately what they were talking about. And I get that my students are intimidated and petrified of me. I have the power in their eyes. Uh-huh. But I'm really not mean. That's the biggest misconception.
If you could have anyone as a mentor for one day, who would it be?
So my first point on this question is that I had great male mentors my entire career.
Okay.
So I want to put that out there, because a lot of young college girls think that they have to have a female mentor, and that's just not true. But if I were to go back and have one for one day, I'd ask Ann Richards to come back to life and be my mentor again for a day. I'd known her since I was in high school, and she was the third female role model in my life. And whenever there was something really big, I knew I could contact her, and she may only have 2 minutes of time to give me, but it was always very valuable 2 minutes.
Mm. How did you know Ann Richards?
Well, I went to school in Austin, and my high school sweetheart was her eldest son, Dan. Okay. And it was boarding school, so you wanted to get a break from being on campus. And so I ended up a lot of weekends at their house. She was famous for her Sunday brunch that she did for the family. Mm-hmm. And, I just stayed in touch with her over the years. It was funny. I would run into her randomly I ran into her at Canyon Ranch. I ran into her on the streets of New York. When I was trying to decide about retiring, I flew down to Washington and sat and, picked her brain a little bit, asked her for guidance. And it was always, she had this wonderful way about it. I mean, I can remember she would see me, she says, "Come hug my neck. So good to see you." And so that's the short version of how I met her. And then after she was no longer governor, she lived in New York a little bit, and she would reach out and invite me to join her for dinner. And one of the most interesting evenings I had was a dinner she had with Lily Tomlin sitting there, and a couple other, wannabe sort of reporter types. It was very amusing to watch them try to preen and show off for Ann and Lily and try to get noticed and help their careers get launched. But gosh, she was funny. The only person that I know that has just as good a sense of humor is actually Bob Gates. He's got a great sense of humor. Just both sort of slightly deprecating and quick-witted. Boy, was she quick-witted. And could disarm the most distrustful of people. She people just would assume things about Anne. And they were quickly surprised that she was nothing like what they thought about when they realized she was pro-business more than they realized she was sharper than they realized she was willing to work hard. And she was on the board of AT&T after she got out of the governor's office. I remember her son saying, "Mama doesn't know how she's going to make money. She's gone in more broke than she came in." And I said, "Trust me, there is going to be all kind of opportunity for this lady. Do not worry about your mother." Mm-hmm. And she went on to have a very happy and fruitful, another life after all of that.
On what you said a second ago, where she could disarm the most distrustful of people, like in my experience, if you want people to give a toot about you, the most important thing is just making sure they know that you give a toot about them and what they care about.
Yeah, and I like to say that she was a true Jeffersonian Democrat. She was about the people. Yeah. And not the kind of just give a handout, but help them.
Yeah.
So.
Do you have a fondest memory of Texas A&M?
There were all kind of good memories. So it's really cliche when I say, of course, the one thing that always everybody remembers and still sends a shiver up your spine today is that first kickoff at Kyle Field. So cliched, but it's the truth.
It's pretty good. I remember my first one. I was 2 years old, 3 years old. And we played TCU that day, and this was when TCU was not any good. And when they shot the cannon off, it was really scary for me, and it hurt my ears. And we shot the cannon, 35 times that day. So my dad was like, he was standing next to me. He said, "Hey, Ben, cover your ears. They're about to shoot the cannon again." So I had I was having fun for about 5 minutes, and then it was just miserable the rest of the way. And then I spent the whole rest of that decade wanting us to shoot the cannon more. But anyway, so I'm glad that you enjoyed your first.
Yeah, I did.
Your first Kyle Field experience.
Then when I came back, I always like to say, I'm most famous for the fact that Reveille bit me twice. Mm-hmm. We had we had that Reveille. I forget which number it was, but she was a biter. They didn't have her very long because they just couldn't quit her of the habit.
7, right?
I'm not sure which number.
Was it recently though?
But the first time I was just standing there and she talking to the handler, and she just all of a sudden just bit me. And he apologized, and I said, "Well, that's okay. She's entitled. I guess maybe I upset her." The next time is really not her fault because I had just eaten the pigs in the blanket, so I'm sure she thought I could smell that on my hand. But still, twice, and they're still here. My fingers are still attached. But,
I'm glad it worked out for you.
Yeah.
We close each session with some good bull. This is an opportunity to recognize someone else for something great they have done. Do you have someone you would like to send some good bull?
Well, I have a program coordinator named Angela Degelman who is, I think, typical of most of the staff at Texas A&M, who goes the extra mile for all her students. So here's to Angie for all that you do for all the extra work that you go to help students when they should have been probably doing it themselves. But you are the epitome of selfless service.
That's great. I'd like to send some good bull to Ronak. I mean, a classmate of mine, my whole class really, but Ronak I know listens to the show and said some nice things the other day. So good bull to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for asking me to do it.
Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to stay up to date on our latest videos, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to receive notifications. If you're in a rush or on the road, you can still join us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. If you want to learn more about us or our guests, please visit our website at mays.tamu.edu/podcasts. Also, please check out Mays Business School's academic programs. They're the sponsors of our show, and you can find them in the description. Thanks, and gig 'em.